The bread was hard, tasting of sawdust and desperation, but to me, it was life. It was the only thing I had eaten in 3 days, a small, crusty heel I'd hidden beneath my floorboards. My fingers, cracked and raw from the biting mountain air, trembled as I brought it to my lips. Then I saw her. She was huddled in the shadow of the Valmont Great Hall, a heap of grey rags against the cold stone. She wasn't a werewolf, I could tell by the lack of predatory heat radiating from her, but she was dying. Her breath came in shallow, ragged puffs of frost. Without thinking, I knelt. I broke the bread. "Take it," I whispered. My voice was a ghost of itself. "Look at the little stray," a voice sneered, cutting through the thin air like a whip. "The Viremont beggar is feeding a corpse." How poetic. 2 pieces of trash sharing a final meal. I didn't look up. I knew the voice. Lord Tristan Moreau. Behind him, the rhythmic clatter of boots told me the royal court was emerging from the solstice prayer. Lord Cedric Vale and Lord Matthias Runwald followed, their silken capes lined with thick wolf fur, looking at me with the same disgust one might reserve for a gutter rat. "Elena Viremont," Matthias chuckled, his eyes cold. "Still clinging to that pathetic sense of nobility? You're an orphan living in a shed. Eat your bread and die quietly. You're embarrassing the scenery." "Enough," a deep, resonant voice commanded. King Lucien Valmont stepped into the light. He was the Sun King, the Alpha of Alphas. His presence usually brought a wave of supernatural heat, a blessing of the sacred fire that kept our kingdom, Valoria, from being consumed by the surrounding glaciers. But today, his eyes were distant, his face a mask of bored granite. He didn't even look at me. To him, I was a flickering shadow, a stain on his cobblestones. Beside him, Queen Evelys Valmont froze. Her eyes locked onto the bread in the stranger's hand, then drifted to my face. Her skin went pale, whiter than the snow. "Lucien," she breathed, her voice trembling. "Look at her hands. Look at what she's doing." "She's being a fool, mother," Lucien dismissed, turning away. "Let the weak perish. It is the law of the pack." As the king turned his back, a sudden, violent crack echoed through the square. The great hearth, the sacred flame that had burned for 1,000 years in the center of the plaza, hissed. The vibrant orange fire turned a sickly, necrotic blue. Then, it went out. A wall of unnatural, supernatural cold slammed into us. The fountain froze mid-spray, turning into a jagged monument of ice. The mocking laughter of the nobles died in their throats as frost began to climb up their expensive boots. I felt a strange, terrifying tug in my chest, as if a string tied to my soul had just been pulled taut. As the kingdom began to freeze, my skin started to hum with a heat I couldn't explain. Every second hits different in this story. Stay till the end, the truth will shock you. New here? Welcome to Bound to the Alpha. Hit the bell, like, share with someone who needs this, and subscribe to join the pack. The days following the Great Extinguishing were a descent into madness. Valoria was a kingdom built on the promise of eternal warmth, a gift supposedly granted to the Valmont line by the gods. Now, that promise was shattering. I retreated to my shack on the edge of the slums. My life had always been a series of less thans. I was the girl whose parents died in a fire accident that left no ashes. I was the girl the teachers ignored because I had no visible wolf spirit. I was the girl Lord Tristan used for target practice, throwing stones at my feet to make me dance. But as the temperature dropped to levels that should have killed a human, I wasn't shivering. I sat in my windowless room, watching the frost creep across the walls. Where my fingers touched the wood, the ice melted instantly. It didn't just melt, it hissed away into steam. I felt a low, thrumming pulse in my veins, a rhythm that seemed to match the dying heartbeat of the land itself. Every time I thought of the stranger I'd fed, the way she looked at me with those ancient, knowing eyes, my blood felt like liquid gold. I walked through the market, or what was left of it. People were huddled in doorways, their furs useless against the soul frost. Lord Cedric Vale passed me, his face gaunt. He didn't mock me this time. He was too busy trying to keep his jaw from locking shut. "You," he wheezed, pointing a gloved finger at me. "Why aren't you blue? Why is there no frost on your breath?" "Maybe I'm already dead, my lord," I said quietly, walking past him. I felt his eyes on my back, fear mixed with a dawning, ugly curiosity. The weaker the kingdom became, the more I felt like I was waking up. By the end of the week, the wolves were losing their forms. The supernatural cold was so intense it suppressed the shift. Strong warriors were trapped in half-human, half-wolf states, whimpering in the streets as their muscles seized. The crops in the glass houses didn't just freeze, they turned to black glass and shattered. Panic was a wildfire that provided no heat. I stood on the cliffs overlooking the capital. The rivers were solid veins of lead. Even the Alpha King's palace, usually a beacon of light, was draped in massive, bone-white icicles that looked like the teeth of a giant. I saw King Lucian in the courtyard, surrounded by his advisors. Lord Matthias was screaming, his voice cracking. "The fires won't relight. We've sacrificed the livestock, we've poured the oils, nothing works. The heart of Valoria is dead." Lucian looked broken. His golden skin was gray. He held a torch to the sacred brazier, his knuckles white. The flame sputtered a pathetic blue for a second and then vanished. As his hope died, my chest burned. It was an agonizing, searing heat. I let out a low cry and sank to my knees. The snow around me vanished in a 10-foot radius, the ground beneath me steaming and turning to dry, warm earth. "There," a voice shrieked. I looked up to see Queen Evelys pointing at me from the balcony. Her face wasn't terrified, it was devastated. "It's her." Just as the scrolls said. The warmth didn't leave the kingdom, it went back to its source because we mistreated it. They didn't come for me with guards. They came for me with desperation. Lucian, Evelys, and the 3 lords who had mocked me stood at the door of my shack. The air here was balmy, a cruel contrast to the frozen wasteland 10 feet away. "Elena," Lucian said. His voice was no longer arrogant. It was a plea. "What are you doing to the city?" "I'm living, my king," I said, my voice steady despite the fire roaring in my ears. "Isn't that what you told me to do? To die quietly?" Queen Evelys stepped forward, pushing past the frozen lords. She held a tattered piece of parchment, the Viremont family tree, or what was left of it before the Valmonts purged the records. "The Valmonts never owned the fire," she whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Centuries ago, your ancestors, the Viremonts, were the flame keepers. We were the protectors, the muscle. But we grew greedy. We told the world the fire was ours. We marginalized your people until only your parents remained. We caused that fire, Elena. We tried to steal the spark from their blood, and when it wouldn't come, the house burned. The silence that followed was heavier than the ice. Lord Tristan Moreau looked like he was going to vomit. Lord Matthias Runwald fell to his knees, not in prayer, but because his legs could no longer support his shivering frame. "You killed them," I whispered. The air in the room spiked to 100 degrees. The wood of the door began to char. "We hid the truth to keep the throne," Lucien admitted, his head bowed. "And now the land is reclaiming what was stolen. The flame is returning to the last Viremont." "The stranger," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "The woman I fed. Who was she?" Evelus looked down. "The spirit of the hearth. She wanders the kingdom when the fire grows dim, looking for a reason to stay. She found it in your last piece of bread. She didn't stay for the king. She stayed for the girl we treated as a beggar." Suddenly, the shack exploded outward. Not from a bomb, but from a release of pure, molten energy. I stood in the center of the ruins, my hair whipping in a wind that was pure heat. My clothes, the rags they had mocked, burned away, replaced by a shimmering, translucent gown of living embers. My skin glowed with the internal light of a dying star. The nobles scrambled back, shielding their eyes. Lord Tristan, who had once thrown stones at me, was now pressed into the snow, weeping. "Please," he sobbed. "Save us. I'll give you everything. My lands, my gold, just make it stop." I looked at him, and for the first time I felt no anger. Only a profound, cold pity. "Your gold can't melt this frost, my lord. Your blood is too cold to sustain a kingdom." Lucien stepped toward me, his hand outstretched. He was the alpha, the king, but in the light of my presence, he looked like a child playing with shadows. "Elena. Valoria is dying. My people are dying. I will abdicate. I will give you the crown. Just save them." I looked at my hands. They weren't shaking anymore. "You want my blood? You want the warmth you spent a lifetime trying to extinguish?" I turned my gaze to the city below. Thousands of lives hung in the balance. I could feel every shivering child, every freezing wolf. Their heartbeats were tiny, flickering lights in my mind. Without Elena, Evelus cried out to the gathering crowd of survivors, "This kingdom dies. She is not the beggar. She is the heart." I walked through the streets of Valoria. Everywhere I stepped, the ice vanished. Steam rose in great, cinematic plumes, shrouding the city in a ghostly mist. The citizens crawled out of their homes, reaching out to touch the warmth radiating from me. I reached the sacred brazier in the plaza. The three lords, Moreau, Vale, and Runwald, stood in a semicircle, trembling. They looked at me with a terrifying mixture of awe and absolute dread. "You mocked me for feeding a stranger," I said, my voice echoing off the frozen walls of the palace. "You called me weak because I knew the value of a single crumb." I looked at Lucien. He stood beside the brazier, his alpha pride stripped bare. "I don't want your crown, Lucien. A crown is just cold metal. I placed my hand on the cold stone of the brazier. I will save this kingdom, I announced. Not because you deserve it. Not because the pack is strong. I will save it because the stranger in the rags showed me that mercy is the only fire that never goes out. I closed my eyes and let the heat in my blood pour into the stone. A pillar of fire erupted from the plaza, shooting miles into the sky, piercing the supernatural clouds. The shockwave hit the glaciers, shattering them into harmless rain. The black crops in the fields dissolved, and fresh green shoots, unnatural and vibrant, tore through the thawing mud. But the fire was different now. It wasn't the harsh, aggressive heat of the Valmonts. It was a soft, golden glow that felt like a mother's hug. When the light faded, I stood alone by the fire. I was no longer the glowing entity of embers, but the heat remained in my eyes. Lucien knelt first. Then Evelys. Then, one by one, the nobles who had spat on my name sank into the wet, warm earth. The pack thrived while I stayed in the shadows, I said, looking at the Sun King. But from this day on, the shadows will have a voice. And the warmth will only stay as long as the smallest among you is fed. The ending was hauntingly quiet. The kingdom was saved, but the scars of the freeze remained on the buildings and in the hearts of the people. I walked away from the palace, back toward the slums. I didn't need their throne. I was the fire itself. And as I passed the spot where I had fed the stranger, I saw a single, golden stalk of wheat growing out of the solid stone, a silent promise that the heart of Valoria would never be cold again. As long as I remembered the taste of that last crust of bread, the frost has thawed, but the impact of Elena Viremont's story lingers as a testament to the power of hidden strength. By reclaiming her heritage as the true source of Valoria's life force, she has shifted the fate of an entire kingdom from the brink of a supernatural collapse. Thank you for watching. We hope this journey into the Hidden Power Chronicles left you feeling the heat of Elena's fire. This story was crafted specifically for our pack members who love deep emotional reversals and the aftershock of a true power shift.